Hello and welcome to our 3T and 3 series for March. I'm Allen Falcon, CEO of Cumulus Global, and I want to thank you for joining us here today for Be Prepared for New Cybersecurity Requirements. Always appreciate you taking time out of your busy day and week to join us here at the live broadcast or to listen and view this recording on demand off the website. So thank you for doing that. Before we get into the heart of the session here today, a couple of housekeeping items we always take care of. First off, you'll notice the audio is muted to prevent disruptions and background noise. So at any point in time, if you have a question or a comment, use that questions window icon along the top or right-hand side of your screen. I'll catch a couple questions if I'm able to during the session. If not, at the end of the presentation, I'll shut down the recording for later, and I'll come back on and I'll spend plenty of time here. I have plenty of time to hang on and do the Q&A and answer any questions you might have. As with all of our live online events here, we record the session and post it on the website, usually within 24 hours. We'll send you a link when it's ready. Please feel free to share. And a reminder that this webcast is one of the many resources we have on our Resource Center on the website, including our Coffee and Cloud series, our weekly Microsoft and Google Workspace bulletins that give you helpful tips, help you get the most out of your Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace environment, and our library of ebooks, white papers, and other resources. And not to forget, you can always subscribe to our monthly newsletter as well, where we should like to share some great ideas and information, keep you posted on things you may have missed. So with that said, let's dive right into the topic at hand and really talk about these new cybersecurity requirements that we see we're starting to see impacting small and mid-sized organizations. And there's really three drivers behind them that we'll go over first: regulations, cyber insurance, and your supply chain. So diving right into that, when we talk about regulations, we're talking really about two types of regulations. The first are the legal ones. And here in the US, we know that there's a whole range of federal regulations. I've listed a couple of them here on the screen: HIPAA for medical information, FERPA, COPPA related to children in schools, Sarbanes-Oxley, corporate governance, mostly on the enterprise and mid-market level. And depending on your part of the financial industry or a publicly traded company, there's SEC and FINRA requirements as well. Now, being a U.S. company, U.S. organization, we could also be impacted if we've got customers in the EU, where if you have a customer in the EU, you need to comply with GDPR, their data privacy regulations. But the real trend that we're seeing going forward is the number of states that are rolling out comprehensive data privacy. And don't get me wrong, we're aware that many states have some general purpose legislation that provide very general, almost vague protections with respect to the privacy of information and personally identifiable information. But in the last couple of years, we've seen now 12 states enact comprehensive data privacy laws. California is probably the most notable because they were first and it's fairly stringent. New York is very similar to theirs as well. And what we see is at the end of 2023, 12 states had bills in progress that were working their way through the legislative process to become law as well. So we expect this trend to continue, and you'll face more state regulation. And the interesting thing about all of these comprehensive data privacy laws, they're all based on where the victim or the consumer, if you will, is located. And so you might be located like we are in Massachusetts, but if you've got customers in other states, you can be held accountable by the privacy laws in those states. And it's creating quite a bit, well, there's a lot of commonality between them. It is creating more things you need to worry about and driving some requirements that you should be thinking about when it comes to your own cybersecurity footprint. The industry regulations, are, we're familiar with PCI DSS for credit and debit card security, but now we're starting to see industries regulating themselves as well. So the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and most state CPA organizations have published data privacy and data confidentiality rules as part of their ethics. Same thing with the American Bar Association and many, many state bar associations. Additionally, we see different industries focusing in on some of the different security frameworks that exist and setting them as best practice for themselves as well. So there's a regulatory push that's saying if you're in certain industries, there's now an industry expectation that you're complying with certain cybersecurity tenets, and we'll get into what those are in a little bit. We look at the second factor, and it's cyber insurance. And really, the long and the short of it is that the cyber insurance market is maturing. When we started out, well, let me step back. Insurance and underwriting, premiums, coverages is really insurance companies base that on experience. What have they insured? What do they anticipate the risk? What was the actual risk that they're facing? And they look at real data and come up with actuarial tables that project and predict. And so early on, cyber insurance was cheap and easy, relatively little coverage, hundreds of thousands or maybe up to $1 million of coverage for a small business, quick and easy, one-page application forms, quick turnaround and approval. And insurance companies quickly got burned. Small businesses that have those simple, easy, policies were getting hit with ransomware. The insurance company was paying out 100% of the policy value. Too many, were happening to really be a viable business. So what do insurance companies do and the underwriters do? They step back and they alter the underwriting. So then we started seeing a pretty dominant trend that said, more rigorous questionnaires, additional questions. And really, if you didn't answer to their satisfaction or they had questions about it, they'd come back and say, in order for us to insure you, you need to do X. And for small, mid-sized businesses, a lot of time that X that they wanted you to do was adopt specific technologies or services. And typically, those would be coming from the enterprise space. They'd be too expensive. They're not products and services designed for small businesses and don't scale down well. So again, you had a disconnect between what the insurance companies felt they need to have a viable business model, be able to provide coverages, and understand their risk. Now, where we're starting to see higher expectations. Not asking for specific technologies or services being in place, but specific capabilities that indicate that you've got a robust cybersecurity infrastructure and a robust set of services. And as it continues to mature, we'll see more. We expect to see more and more of these showing up in the questionnaires and the security audits as part of the underwriting process. So on the front end, right, the sign-up process is getting more rigorous. On the back end is accountability, and this really started in late 2022 when an insurance company actually filed suit in federal court against one of their customers. The customer had put on their survey, their questionnaire, that they had multi-factor authentication. They were hit with ransomware, some other malware. The forensics team, the insurance company hires the forensics team. They go in and realize multi-factor authentication wasn't in place everywhere. And so obviously there's a dispute. The insurance company preemptively sues the client saying that the misinformation about multi-factor authentication was a gross misrepresentation of the level of risk being assumed by the insurer and the insurance company. They ended up settling. The long and the short of it, that victim of ransomware who thought they had insurance policy wasn't covered, and Travelers was able to walk away and sort of set a precedent about the viability and the statement you're making when you check those boxes on it. So on the front end, more stringent questions, deeper questions, more probing, higher expectations to what you have in place, so they can more accurately underwrite you. And on the back end, an expectation of accountability that information is really accurate. And so we're seeing that, seeing that, dichotomy, or the front end and the back end, starting to emerge even in the small and mid-sized business market. The third factor is the supply chain. And this isn't new to us. We've seen it before, right? We saw it, for example, with Y2K. Big companies being held accountable to make sure they were compliant, that their systems would keep running. What happens? Those big organizations say, are told and believe and understand that for them not to be impacted by Y2K, then their suppliers have to be protected or ready as well. We see that, for example, with HIPAA requirements. The actual doctor's office that's subject to HIPAA laws, in order to be compliant, they have to make sure that everyone they do business with who might touch the health information of their patients understands the confidentiality requirements and agrees to abide by the rules as well. That's the Business Associates Agreement, or the BAA, right? So the target of the regulation in order to comply, or the target of the industry standard in order to comply, has to sort of place that requirement on their supply chain and the people they buy goods and services from. As small and mid-sized businesses, especially those who service other businesses, It's the water effect. It's going to flow downhill to us. And so understanding that compliance includes the supply chain, we're starting to see, and we should all expect, as we look forward 6, 12, 18 months, that our business customers are going to start requiring verifiable cybersecurity measures. And that's going to happen when they onboard us as a new vendor. We're going to have to attest to it, maybe even answer, it's not uncommon now for large corporations to ask suppliers to complete security questionnaires and audits, very similar in nature to what the cyber insurers use. Expect to see updated contractual terms as far as data handling, privacy, and data protections. And what happens if there's a breach is a violation of the contract and what penalties can come into play. And expect to see large companies that are buying from smaller companies looking for audit and review rights so they can validate that what you're telling them is true and they can ensure that their supply chain is safe. So 3 different drivers are really putting things, putting pressure on smaller organizations to up their cybersecurity game. So where are we now and what's next? And now the big change is that the table stakes have shifted, right? And the expectation of what's your entry point with respect to cybersecurity protections and infrastructure versus what you would do minimally and maybe add on to in the past. So we talk about table stakes. There are many aspects to it. For years and in some states now, you're required to have a written information security plan. That's now table stakes. You can't just have a set of services and products and services. You need to understand how your security is configured, managed, run, how you understand that it's working properly, how you understand if something goes wrong, and what do you do in the case that something does go wrong. It's a question you're going to see more on the cyber insurance policies, not just on your general business liability policy. And it's a question you're going to get from companies that do business with you. Next is identity access and management. Table stakes now isn't just strong passwords. It's having multi-factor authentication. Everywhere it's possible to use, multi-factor authentication should be in place. And again, we see that on the questionnaires, we see it on the audits, we see that as part of contractual terms happening. Next are protections. Just having malware protection on your desktop isn't enough anymore. You need that next-gen endpoint protection that isn't just looking at virus signatures, it's looking at file and system behavior with the ability to stop it and hopefully even unwind it before it gets out of hand. Advanced threat protection, advanced scanning of emails for bad links, infected attachments, phishing, etc. is essential. And email configuration, not just having your sender policy framework or SPF record that attempts to prove your emails are coming from a valid IP address, but DKIM, domain key identity management, which confirms with header tags that the content of messages haven't been altered, and DMARC, which combines those 2 protocols and some additional information to say, hey, we know that this email is coming from where it's supposed to, it's not being spoofed, the content hasn't been modified, and recipient, if there are other factors that look suspicious, here's what you should do with it, and we're going to report what happens back to the sender. Okay, so those are really now core protections and expectations. In fact, DKIM and DMARC are now being examined by Google, Yahoo, and other large email providers so that if your volume of email into those services is sufficient enough and you don't have DKIM and DMARC, they're going to block all messages from your domain anyways. And that can be very damaging to your business. Not quite there yet, but we see it really close as DNS protections and web analysis, web filtering, and web monitoring, so that when you go to a trusted website, if it's been compromised, when that autoplay video starts, it's not downloading code or a virus to your system. Encryption, both at rest and in motion, now part of table stakes. It needs to be there. You can't be walking around with a laptop with the data on it unencrypted, and clearly you should only be working through encrypted channels and communications when you're connecting to your office, to your servers. This is just best practice, and it's expected to be there. There's some human factors that are now there. It's not just you have policies and procedures, appropriate use, BYOD, whatever. Security awareness training. Cyber insurance is going to ask you about it. Your customers are going to ask you about it if they're doing an audit, because it's really, are you keeping your team, your staff informed of what the risks are, how their behavior can help the situation or hurt the situation, and what to do if they suspect something's wrong? Okay, the human factor. I mean, there's an old joke about security that says, if you never want sensitive information to leave your business, never let your employees talk to anyone or go home, right? The human factor is a key factor in security. That awareness training is now table stakes. It's part of a basic expectation. And finally is recovery and response. And this is where having cyber insurance comes into play and having data backup and recovery in place, not just for what's still on your local servers or your hosted systems, but the data you're putting in cloud services. The data, all your data Microsoft 365 should be backed up. Or if you use Google Workspace, all of your data in Google Workspace should be backed up. Those vendors back up their systems to protect the systems and make it available to you. It's your responsibility to secure, manage permissions, and protect your data. And again, if you're running, Microsoft 365 and you have the OneDrive client, so your desktop Microsoft apps can browse through what's in the cloud, using, Windows Explorer and the native capabilities of the apps, then guess what? If your laptop is hit with ransomware, it's going to follow those same paths and links and encrypt everything up in the cloud as well. And so it's important that you're able to recover from that type of incident. And so this is now sort of the minimum, entry level or table stakes. And I grant it, for small, mid-sized companies, many of us don't have all of these things in place yet. But as we go through, the expectation is going to be it's going to happen, and we're going to get there more quickly than we probably thought we had to 12 months ago or even 6 months ago. So what are the new expectations? There's two aspects to this. One is sort of the next level of protections and action, right? So on the leadership, chances are your cybersecurity is going to ask you which cybersecurity, cyber insurance agent's the question is going to ask you which cybersecurity model you're benchmarking against. CIS or NIST are the two most common ones on the business space. They might ask about CMMC version 2 if you're a business that deals with the government and that requirement's coming down. We expect after it's for government, it'll become more generally required across all businesses. They're going to look at identity and access management. And it's not just, do people have logins and good password hygiene? And do you have two-factor authentication? Do you have unified identity access management services that control logins and access once logged in? And maybe that's an SSO system, or maybe it's just proper configuration of all of the different systems you use. On top of that, we're now going to be looked at to see if we have privileged access management. What does that mean? It means your administrators, the IT people and the business people who hold the keys to the kingdom, if you will, making sure that they don't. Right? So if your IT super admin needs to go in and make a change, they have to request the access to do it, log when and why they're doing it. It's granted for a limited function or limited period of time, and then the permissions are automatically taken away and logged, right? So that you have a record of, when it comes to system configuration and security settings, who can access it, who accessed it, when, why, and for how long, and what did they do while they accessed it. And that's a new model. It means, hey, if you're a small business and, your IT firm comes in and manages your server and it's time to do push updates, and those require supervisor privileges, they're going to have to request the privilege access management from a system so that the fact that they did it and the update it applied and the result of the update all get recorded. It's a way of making sure that no one's tampering with things, or if something does go wrong, you know what to do to back it out. The next level includes more active protections and verification. So it's not just enough to have next-gen endpoint protection on your laptop. You should have remote monitoring and management. And that really says that we're looking at more than just waiting for something to go wrong and finding it. We're monitoring. Hey, did the most recent Windows update apply automatically, or has the computer been off hours and hasn't allowed it to happen? Let's contact the user, make sure that gets done. Do we need to push new software, a new version of software out, or a new agent or a new security tool out? That's remote monitoring and management. Zero trust, not really. This I think is a more longer term or midterm expectation. This is where by default, when someone logs in your environment, they have access to nothing. And based on their role and responsibility, they're granted specific access to what they need. And that type of protection is really about what happens if someone gets in, where can they go from there, and making sure they can't go anywhere they shouldn't go. Penetration testing isn't just external now from the outside saying, hey, can I pound your firewall or your router or your systems and get in and find something? It's, okay, assume someone got in, they're on a computer, what damage can they do, what can they see, where can they move? And so that internal penetration testing as well. And finally, backup and recovery is not enough. It's great that all your data is safe and you can go back to the point before the crisis and restore and hopefully not lose too much work and make it up and get back going. The question we're starting to see now in the insurance applications are about business continuity. If you got caught with ransomware, how long would it take you to get key systems and people back up and running? And there's two key metrics there. One is RTO, return to operations. That's just getting your business up and running, even in a degraded way, so that you can continue to deliver services, pay bills, invoice, manage your cash flow, manage your people. And then there's return to normal operations, which means you're not only back up and running, but all of your systems have been restored, missing data has been, or damaged data has been restored and corrected, etc. And so that's sort of like the next level of, IT technology and services that you need around security and recovery. Then there's the mindset of active security management. And this is where we get into managed detection and response, right? We're not just having that endpoint protection. We're monitoring that environment. If something goes wrong, someone gets notified and the system either tells you that you need to do something or it can automatically remediate the problem. Security event and incident management tools, or SIMs, or SIEMs, as some people call them. These collect the security and activity logs from your servers, your workstations, your network devices, etc. And the better tools don't just collect it, they collate it and do some analysis to tell you if any of the alerts or status changes are a problem, or if they see a pattern that needs to be looked at and filtered. Okay, and so again, it's not just waiting for something to go wrong, it's looking at what's happening in the environment and saying, hey, there's something that could be wrong or is wrong. We need to see it, see what's happening, investigate it, and effectively generate an alert. Now, the cyber insurance questionnaires and your customers may not ask you if they have a SIM by name. They may say, do you collect and save administrative and security logs from throughout your IT environment? And another question might be, do you analyze those logs for patterns to alert you to problems, right? So it's talking about the function. The questions might not be about the technology or the service you're using. They'll talk about the function that they want to see performed. Similarly, with that, when you have managed detection and response, when you have SIM, do you have some sort of incident response in play, both at the tactical level, if you think there's a breach or you think there's ransomware starting and you've cut it off, but you want to make sure, as well as the macro level, saying how's the environment, what's the security profile, has something been collated that looks who's going to actually take action, and if there is a security incident, what are the steps, who gets called, who gets notified, what do you do with affected systems, when do you call law enforcement, when do you call the cyber insurance company, etc. And around that sort of an expectation, you might get questions about, do you have monitoring of your security systems in place with the ability to act, and is it business hours or is it 24/7? That's the security operations center, right? And then the last item as far as active security management is, I talked about CIS and NIST and CMMC2 as security frameworks and models. There are others as well. So if you collect credit or debit card information, if you process those, you have PCI DSS. That's a security, there's a very specific reference model. If you have health information, HIPAA is a security reference model. Cyber insurers, some of your customers may be asking you how well, they can ask you if you're certified, right, against those models, but they're also could be looking for how are you monitoring your compliance with the requirements of the security reference models that cover your business and your operations, and how are you managing it? And so again, it's saying you're not just waiting to see, hey, are you trying to prevent stuff, and if something happens, you know how to respond. All of these items on the right side of the screen assume that you're actively thinking and working your security environment every day. And that's a huge shift. Everything on this screen costs money. And the challenge is small and mid-sized entities, businesses, schools, governments, is the budget, right? Ideally, we'd love to say, hey, I can do all this, but you put a dollar figure to it, and it can be scary and prohibitive. So the real question that we look at is the balance between what's required for your contracts with your business customers as those expectations start being expressed and mandated for you. And as you look at your insurance and your protection, as you look at your risk profile, these things, there's still a decision. There's still a business decision, to be made on what you can spend and where you're going to spend it first to have the most effect. And I'll be honest, there are things that for small businesses on this list where you might look and say, hey, for me, I'll take the slightly higher cyber insurance premium rather than add this service or capability, given my risk profile. And you're assuming some risk there, right? And so is your insurance company. And you can make those business decisions. They're very valid. The point here is that these expectations are coming. And we believe that they're going to be demanded more quickly and more consistently than we've seen in the past. And it's sort of the direction we're heading in. So I've covered a lot of ground. We're approaching the half-hour mark. I don't want to go, overtime or lose the focus here. So what's the action? What's the call to action here? Well, contact us. Free session, no obligation, introductory call with one of our cloud advisors. The URL bit.ly/CG intro call is on the screen, as well as a QR code you can scan with your phone right now or save for later. Send us an email, info@Cumulus Global. You can contact me directly. No, please don't call. I'm bad at answering the phone. I'm worse at answering voicemail. I don't have an assistant, so that email's coming to me. I'll see it. If I can't respond promptly, I will have someone on my team start the conversation. I'll join in as appropriate. So get in touch with us. Some of the things we can do, we're offering a rapid security assessment for free now that you've attended this webcast or watched this event on demand. You spend 5 minutes, 7 minutes maybe filling out a form. We take that data, we basically benchmark you against those table stakes and say what's there, what's missing, what might you want to fill in, and a budgetary estimate of what that costs and what that might look like, along with some information about your risk profile that you may want to consider as you're making decisions. And so we can help you get a feel for where you're at and what your next steps might be. So at this point, I want to thank everyone who's watching this on demand, because this is the point when we go into the Q&A session where I take a pause for a moment. I'll stop the recording. So if you're watching this on demand, you're watching the recording of this session, thank you for doing so. Don't forget, if you have any questions, concerns, ideas, you want to chat, please contact us. We're happy to help in any way we can. In all honesty, if your situation is something that we're going to be able to handle, we're going to put you in touch with people who can help because we want to see you succeed. So thanks for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to stop the recording now and come back for the live Q&A. Thank you very much and have a great day.